Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset, a podcast that is designed to bring thought leaders from a variety of pathways. Leaders who are inspirational, who have faced their tough times, and have gained new insights on how to move forward. That certainly is true of our guest speaker today, Bryant Galindo. Now, Bryant is actually a returning guest. We first had him earlier in 2022 when he was ready to launch his new book, The New Middle. It's a fascinating book filled with ideas for all kinds of people in terms of how to face conflict, navigate through conflict, particularly for the entrepreneur and startup companies. Bryant is the founder of Collabs HQ, and he works with startup founders, executives, and teams as a mediator, as an executive coach, in navigating through partnership issues, founder issues, etc., in terms of how to help them move on to the next step. He talks a great deal about mentorship and some of his own challenges that in making the change. Join me on our upcoming episode. Don't go away, and please pass this on to other people and subscribe so you're always notified of our next upcoming events. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. And as you know, I told you about our guest speaker's background before we actually opened up our interview. I just want to first greet Bryant Galindo, mediator like myself, but author, speaker, and so forth. Welcome, Bryant.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I'm happy to be back.
Well, great. Yeah. And for those of our viewers and listeners who don't know, Bryant was on my show earlier this year at the release of his new book, The New Middle.
Yeah.
And so excited, Bryant. What have you done with your new book just to get us started here?
Yeah, so I did a pre-launch campaign. I sold over 150 books through that. And then I sold another 100 since I've launched in the summer of this year. And so now I'm kind of getting started to do a book tour next year of, little book talks, maybe some workshops, inspirational events, because I really want to continue putting the message out there about the book.
Great. In just a few words, what's the essence of the message in this book? Why should people read it?
Yeah, so it's basically talking about how do you connect your heart and mind to collaboratively disagree. So instead of allowing our reactions and kind of our dysfunctional patterns of drama to dictate how we respond to a conflict, it's looking at what are those patterns that are maybe unconscious, and then how do we reframe them and ultimately heal them so we can develop new ways of speaking when we're in conflict. And I think that message is just so applicable from the workplace to everyday life, maybe even politically. And I feel that we need a new way of kind of communicating and also bringing forward a lot of different disciplines into a cohesive thread, because I weave in conflict resolution, psychology, neuroscience, a little bit of spirituality to give people that roadmap. Like, what does that look like? And I kind of use myself as a case study. So showcasing how it's possible to go from a people pleaser, accommodator, to someone who's respectfully assertive and also collaborative.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot packed into that book, I know, because I have read it, but I wanted you to summarize real quickly. I love, particularly your focus on the interdisciplinary, and that's so aligned with my heart too, because I work a lot in the lawyer, mediator, leader space, and I just got off a 2.5-day conference where I spoke on a couple of different things, but my attorney mediator friends love bringing me in because I do bring in that psychological, emotional dimension that all of us have.
Yep.
And as we now know from our neuroscientific advances, that emotions do precede all cognition. So don't think you can get away with it. It's how you manage it, how you show up that makes the difference. So yeah, I'm really excited. I just, as you were speaking, I just thought, oh, I have to recommend your book to a couple of projects I'm working on with teams of leaders who haven't been functioning real great. And so I think this will give them some new insights, not just Dr. D saying it, it's coming from other people.
Yes.
And because after all, we're not, it can be simple. It's not necessarily easy.
It's a practice.
Yeah. It can be
Mhm.
complex, but we can break it down so it's manageable. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, little
Yeah.
bite-sized pieces, right? This is sustainable change. It's not just like a framework or a script, which I think a lot of conflict resolution books kind of get into. It's like, here's a
Hmm.
script, right, for
Yeah.
salary
Yeah.
negotiation. Here's this, which look, I get it, but also like let's create sustainable change internally so that the external reflects that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That reminds me of another speaker I had who talked about the conflict within
Hmm.
becomes conflict without or external to us. So yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So Hugo Menard, viewers and
Mm,
listeners, you can look that one up. Okay, he's from Australia, and so and like you works, a lot in the workplace, like me, a lot in the
hmm.
workplace, and he really came at it, and this totally ties into our topic today,
Mm,
finding the value in intergenerational collaborations.
mm,
Because part of his story, just so you know the backdrop, is that as somebody working in corporate America, and he was awakened to the general dysfunction that
mm,
goes on, and really became passionate about that. He himself experienced some of his own health and well-being decline as a result of the toxic work environment. And he
mm.
vowed to set out in ways to make a difference. And so that's what his work is really focused on. And I know, because I know your story, I know that your work also has evolved or generated from some of your own life experiences. And so you want to tap
Correct.
into that just a little bit, Brian?
Yeah, I think so the beginning story of my book is a stabbing that occurred where I almost died on
Yeah,
Halloween night
yeah.
about 6 or 7 years ago.
Hmm.
And I use that story to showcase that like traumatic events can also be life altering if you can
Hmm.
really lean into the wisdom of the event and not be in a victimization role, right? Like, why did this happen? What can I learn from this? And at that point in my life, I was a very like shrunken man, so to speak, in terms of like putting myself out there, having self confidence, not really using my voice. And I felt like that event really kind of lit a light bulb in my head of like, wow, I'm not living. I want to live. I actually want to experience life and not just be a shell of a human. And that led me on this personal development journey that I'm now on, and which I kind of imbue my work with, which is like, how do we take these moments of tragedy, resilience, grit, and then allow it to fuel us and empower us to be better leaders, better humans, better workers, and really bringing it all together.
Well, yeah, yeah. And well, again, like so many of my guest speakers, we've had, major life altering events
Hmm.
that have really sparked a new way of thinking. And
Hmm.
so, I'm so happy that, out of such a tragic experience, you survived.
Yes.
But I'm very fortunate to have you bring your message to us in this
Mm.
venue. Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, it's what I've learned, in my work with people too, is that I came up with a saying is out of moments of adversity comes the momentum for opportunity,
Mm.
and so or out of moments of pain comes the momentum for gain, is another way I
Mm.
look at it. So we can use those difficult, challenging spaces in our life to say, okay, this isn't working, so what can I do differently, and
Yep.
how do I want to live my life and actually be, become the architects of our life, making active choices.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And little wake up calls, right?
Yep. Yes, absolutely. It's so timely with your interview and your topic, because I
Mm.
actually am dealing with a intergenerational family issue
Mm.
right now, and so it's so important. And I'm going to get you more into this. I know when I
Hmm.
include my generational differences component in my cultural competency class, that each generation is shaped by certain historical events,
Hmm.
certain socioeconomic events, uh, natural disasters, and so these things do shape our mindsets in terms
Hmm.
of how we look at the world, and one generation leads to another. And I think it's I should know this better, but Plato or Aristotle, who talked about, the generation before them. And so this
Mm.
has been this has been a dilemma,
Yep.
a challenge, for centuries and centuries and centuries way before us. And so the realities that exist. And so how do we
Hmm.
manage it? So talk to me
Mm.
more a little bit about, the hidden value of looking at intergenerational collaboration.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is my relationship with my mentor.
Hmm.
She's a boomer, she's much older, but one thing that she has that maybe I sometimes can lack is wisdom. And
Wow.
so I really appreciate her insights and her
Hmm.
ability to kind of give me that larger perspective. And I obviously add something of value to her as well. I'm bringing in information that is, maybe like technological. Sometimes I help her with like technology, or I'm giving her kind of pop culture references. And so she always likes to say that, oh, you help me stay current,
Yeah. Yes.
and I think that is some older individuals may find that phrase not cute, might find it hard to stomach, right? Oh, does that mean I'm not current? Does that mean I'm getting
Yeah.
old, right? It triggers that aspect.
Hmm.
But if we neutralize that and we can really look at it, that is actually the value, right? Is that the younger generations are the ones who are the trendsetters, right? They're the ones who are plugged into pop culture, and there's value in that. And in the workplace, if you want to innovate, you need to bring that forward. And you also need the wisdom, right? The people who have lived before you, who have charted those paths, charted those courses, and like, how do you bridge that? Right, because it's so easy to get triggered in our fears, and it, like for that example, right, it's like, oh, does that mean that I'm no longer relevant, right? And so if you're projecting that out, then you're not going to be able to hear someone who might have a really good idea that can be
Hmm.
very helpful for the company to innovate. And I think that's where we can get lost. We can get mired in our own intrapersonal kind of like things that we're
Hmm.
dealing with, and we don't really see the value that is right in front of us. And
Yeah.
so I like to think as intergenerational collaborations as the first foundational element needs to be respect.
Yeah.
We have to respect one another, and we have to be willing to hear one another and not
Hmm.
play power games, because
Hmm.
so many workplaces, because there are hierarchies, people have maybe been there for a few years, maybe even decades, that they have a hard time accepting the new because it's triggering all of those fears that they have latent inside of them.
Right, right. And it's in fact, it just came across my LinkedIn feed this morning, a quote, and it wasn't said, it didn't state who the author was.
Mm,
Unfortunately, I can't cite that. But the quote went something like, leadership is not about being in charge.
mm,
Leadership is about taking care of those who are under your charge.
hmm
I thought that
hmm
was really well put. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, there was a study that was done around mentorships where the mentor was actually a younger person and the mentee was
Mhm.
an older person, and they found that it it created a lot of intangible value in the workplace, because not only did this person who was
Mhm.
younger kind of come into networks that might not be available to them, but they were also able to help the older individual by kind of helping them recognize, like, again, those intrinsic value points that may
Mhm.
not be apparent, that can help the company or the team innovate. And I know there is a man, he was the mentor for the Airbnb founders,
Oh yeah.
Chip Connolly, I believe is his name, who has the
Mhm.
Modern Elder Academy. I
Okay.
thought I follow him. He talks about, like, 50s are the place when you become an elder. So like step into that role. How are you going to give back? I know, right? Uh, and but like I thought that was really beautiful, because he's trying to destigmatize a word that I think in American or maybe Western context,
Mhm.
right, again, is like, oh no, we put our elders in like a nursing home, right,
Yeah.
and then we never see them, they don't produce any more value. But he's saying, no, your lived experience is value enough, so where
Mhm.
are you plugging yourself in to find that purpose again?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that in what you just said and what you said earlier is that, one thing I try to do is reframe, it's just a different perspective.
Hmm.
We're looking at the same thing, but because of our life experiences, our knowledge, our role, whatever that might be, we just look at things differently.
Hmm.
And so I like to talk about, developing a mindset that shifts challenging confrontations into learning conversations.
Hmm.
You're clearly a different age group than I am. So what can I learn from you by how you look at things rather than, no, I don't want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah, and being defensive, right? It's like, I think if any company or team is trying to assemble an intergenerational team, it's like starting off there, right? We're all gonna learn here, and one team that I was a part of that had that did it really well. The manager of the team, this was like way years ago. What she did really well was like there are no hierarchies in this team. We are all equals here, and everyone's voice matters. And
Mm-hmm.
some people have more experience than others. That's okay. But we're really about the best ideas because it was all about iterating very fast. And so the iteration cycle didn't allow for, we can't just be like debating and being at each other's throats. We really got to allow every little aspect, like, what do you know? What do you know? What do you know, to come forward to see what can we all co-create together.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction when you talk about in within the team.
Hmm.
You're pretty much on a lateral level. Now,
Hmm.
organizationally, of course, there needs to be
Yes,
some layers, of course.
of course.
But I think within a team, it has to be a level playing field in order for, I like to say, creating that psychological safety so that people
Hmm.
do feel safe enough to speak up and know they're not going to be shot down, humiliated, cut off, because that's a surefire way to stop the conversation and start brewing the conflict, right?
Yes, of course. And I'm even thinking about one of my clients right now is having first time manager. She's in her late 20s and she has a younger 20-year-old on her team that she has to manage. And she's having issues because this person is just like talking out of turn. She's the most
Mm,
junior person on the team, it
mm,
takes up a lot of time. Her ideas aren't that great. So, like, how do you work with that, right? Without like quashing that
yeah.
passion. And I think that's also very important with new workers, right? They're trying to prove themselves, they're trying to learn as well. But you, as a manager or someone who might be a team lead, need to learn how to empower that while also
Mhm.
like kind of giving corrective feedback, which
Right.
can be a very delicate dance.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know that well. In fact, that's one of my other passions. I teach a class on coaching and feedback forward, how
Mm,
to do it constructively and creatively, so that you maintain that momentum and enthusiasm that people bring to the table, without shutting them down.
yep.
So it's the proverbial, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Why is this so important, Bryant? I mean, I think you've touched into that a little bit, but I really want to bring that part of your message out. Why is this so
Mm.
important to look at intergenerational collaborations?
I think because our world is rapidly changing from the workplace to just even politically, and we can't get stuck thinking that one age group has all the answers.
Yeah.
And I think the fallacy or the folly of a humans is that we all believe we're right in our perspective. And so I think the humility of intergenerational collaborations is that it kind of starts to reset that bias.
Yeah.
And I think a perfect example of that is like the US Congress, right? Like the fact that Nancy Pelosi, after what, 20 something odd years,
Right.
finally gave the gavel to someone else, not the gavel, but like the leadership role to a new
Right.
generation. And it was big
Mm-hmm.
news, right? It was like,
Hmm.
wow. And I think when we are so stuck on ego and power and stature, we forget that sometimes we need fresh ideas.
Hmm.
And those fresh ideas are really what can help us to iterate, to innovate, to grow, to evolve. And every age bracket has a piece of that puzzle.
Yeah.
And so we need to like collaborate together to co-create that puzzle so
Hmm.
that we can really harness what is the best of each age group.
Yeah. Again, so many pearls of wisdom in there, and uh, I I love some of the verbiage that you're using, as as you
Mm,
describe that too, and you say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about describing it like that before, but that makes good sense." And again, I'm learning, So
mm,
there's been a saying around, and again, I can't quote the author. It's been quite a while, but of course, I think I have the best idea
mm.
until I hear a better one, and then I embrace that one. Well, they say, imitation is the greatest form of flattery, right?
Mm. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, just give ownership. Yeah, yeah. So what are some ideas for how leaders can embrace or
Mm.
frame, this intergenerational collaboration approach? What tips can you share with our viewers and listeners?
Well, I think the ROI of
Mhm.
that is
Mhm.
actually well established, especially like within like the startup world, right? Those are the ones who are iterating faster. Usually, once a startup has gotten funding and they've become established with product market fit, they bring in senior leaders who have been working in that field for like 10, 15 years to kind
Mhm.
of occupy like that next layer of hierarchy.
Mhm.
So I feel like the ROI is well established, and leaders who can understand that are just like, okay, sure, the implementation is the harder part, because as we've already mentioned, you're going to butt up against people's fears. And for a leader to be able to hold that space and to be willing to acknowledge that, I think is the first go ahead. And then to create the standards, the principles. That's why I said first foundation, respect. How do you introduce that from the beginning? And then how do you co create with that team to be able to understand what are the norms that are going to regulate this so that we can harness the innovative factors of each generation.
Okay. Okay. And so it really, I mean, even from the leader standpoint, then it's
Hmm.
about developing a strategy, making
Yes.
expectations um, clear in terms of these are our goals, and this is the suggested way of getting there. And I'm not sure about you, but I know one thing I find when I'm working with leaders and organizations
Hmm.
in the work that I do is that oftentimes there are implicit assumptions made at many
Hmm.
levels. And
Hmm.
so it really starts back with, leaders, are you being clear in your vision, your expectations, roles and responsibilities? Roles and responsibilities for me as a mediator is a topic that comes up significantly. Got one going on right now. And
Mm.
where there is a lack of clarity and where there was actually a loss of leadership that led to people stepping outside their swim lanes or their
Mm.
roles and responsibilities, and then creating a lot of confusion.
Mm.
And that same thing happened in another organization that I'm working with to sort of redirect how does the top leadership function and communicate, because it clearly got out of hand for a few months that led to confusion and chaos among the masses. You know, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so is there a framework that that you have a template on, or is it a case by case basis? So just how do you go about that when you're working with leaders and startups or organizations at whatever level?
Well, I take an executive kind of coaching
Okay.
perspective. So I want to make sure that the client I'm working with, because unfortunately with my clients now, they don't have a lot of like boomers or Gen X.
Hmm.
And so it's mostly like millennials and Gen Zers, right?
Okay.
And sometimes we will have that like zillennial person in there as well. But even
Hmm.
then, there's still like communication differences. And I
Hmm.
always talk about, again, what is that framework? And so we work on like a team charter. So talking about like, okay, let's make the implicit explicit.
Hmm.
So, what are the communication standards that we need to adhere to as a team? What are the principles that we're going to be living through? What are the values, right? Because these are very like high fast iteration teams that need to build value fast. And
Hmm.
so you got to make sure that those stumbling blocks that a lot of people don't talk about until way later when there is a problem are brought forward in the beginning. And so I find that a team charter, even if it's like a 1.5 hour like kind of workshopy facilitation, boom,
Hmm.
they have something that everyone agrees to.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of my framework that I work with. But
Okay.
when I was working with a larger institution that was a Fortune 500 company and I was an outside consultant, I came in and I was working with all of the generations and I had
Hmm.
so much pushback.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was really disheartening because I could feel people's resistance to me
Hmm.
just by the very fact that I was younger than them. I was going to be telling them what to do. And that's when the manager of that team had to come in and really step in and say, look, we contracted Bryant because he has knowledge that our team doesn't have.
Right.
You guys have institutional knowledge.
Hmm.
We need to bridge that. So how are we doing that?
Hmm.
Because the first time I stepped into a facilitation room to talk about my work, one woman's like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. We can't do that. And she had been there
Hmm.
for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And so she saw that, and to her credit, she was astute enough to like call it out, but do it in a way that was like, let's bring in the whole team as so that we can use this as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's really, a great way to frame it as far as let's learn from one another. Let's learn how
Hmm.
you see it. And then out of that, develop, using your words, collaborative
Hmm.
outcomes. And
Hmm.
I always like to say too, what's working, what's not working. It's not what was wrong or whatever, but what were the factors for why it didn't work? And
Hmm.
do those same factors apply today?
Hmm.
Because otherwise, it's too easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Drawing on that proverbial saying, right?
Yeah. What
Yeah.
what do you use any frameworks?
Well, being a mediator,
Hmm.
uh, you know, I, I might be contacted, that yeah, we've got a conflict between two people,
Mm,
and we want mediation. And say, well, let's do a little exploration first, because mediation is certainly a solution in the dispute resolution spectrum,
yeah.
but there may be other things that need to be done first.
Mm,
And so, um, uh, particularly when a lot of people are impacted, I do more of a work climate or organizational
mm,
analysis. And so that's where, I do one-on-one interviews with people as a cross section of
mm,
the department or the section of the organization that's being challenged, or if it's a small enough organization, everybody. Um, uh, and so then, develop a framework of questions that everyone is asked, so that I have these diverse perspectives, and then I
mhm,
can sort of look at the trends and issues and things like that. So I engage in conflict analysis first. What's this conflict
mm,
about? Is it organizational? Is it systems or processes, or is it simply the people? And
mm,
then two, what's the level of intensity?
mm,
And there are sort of 5 dimensions that I work along then, because then that can dictate what kind of interventions are best needed. I know I started a mediation about a month or so ago, and it's taken a while, unfortunately, to because I also engage in pre-mediation.
mm,
Parties are not prepared necessarily to address their conflict, and so um, you know finding out what's important to them, and starting to generate ideas already about what would they like to see different moving forward, to get them out of the past, where a lot of people tend to get stuck. But we attempted to do a two-party mediation, and first one party was not quite ready. Okay, and then when we actually had the date, then the other party backed off and said not ready. And so now we're actually going to take more of a restorative circle approach,
mm,
and they're each going to bring in a support person, because one particular just doesn't feel safe, even with me
mm,
there, being in the room with the other person, because of the nature of behaviors that have been demonstrated. So I do go through an analysis
mm,
process too, and in also match that up with what is the organization looking for.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah. And then the
Mm,
one that I'm sort of in phase 2 right now, we're actually doing leadership development among the top 6, teaching them some skills and frameworks for communication that then they're going to take to the next level of leadership,
mm,
and then equip them so that they can take it down into the what they call the floor. So
mm,
yeah, so it's systematic, it's
mhm,
strategic. Yep. So, but it's really understanding those things, and of course generational. You can't. I mean, it's there. It's not something to be missed or avoided by any means. And so the
yeah.
more people you have involved in taking a look at fresh ideas is really, really important.
Yep, of course.
Yep. Yeah. So when you talk about the wisdom of generations, uh, how do you harness and leverage those differences
Mm.
that tend to exist, without them snuffing each other out, shall we say?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm gonna go back to my mentor relationship because
Hmm.
that seems to be the template I'm kind of working with,
Hmm.
which is that you allow the person to be heard, right?
Hmm.
You respect them, you're curious, it's that open growth mindset that
Hmm.
allows those ideas to come forward, and catching your biases, catching
Yeah.
your judgments,
Hmm.
catching those stereotypes or generalizations that you make,
Hmm.
around each generation, so that you can not be privy to kind of that energy, because I think there's a lot of beauty that each generation holds, as well as like lessons that they need to learn, right? Because as you mentioned, everyone had those historical events that kind of really shaped their generational lens.
Hmm.
And so, I think it's a dance, it's a process, it's a journey, and each person has to be willing to take part in it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I like what you have to say. It is a process. Many
Hmm.
people will think about mediation or an intervention as an event,
Mm,
Okay, but it really is a process or a series of events that take place in order to get to that mindset shift
Hmm.
that leads to successful resolution of whatever the differences or dispute was all about in the beginning.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
You know, one of the questions I know we discussed prior to starting the interview, but I think it'd be really appropriate to share that here now. I inquired, well, how do people find you? How do you get, where do your clients come from? And so I'd
Hmm.
like you to explain that a little bit further, because I think it has a lot of application to many professionals like you and I, who are mediators, and specialize in organizational interventions, for example. That sometimes I find that people just don't know where to start.
Yeah, that's true. And my starting point was taking an online certification program on inbound marketing.
Mm,
So, if for those who don't know what inbound marketing is, there's outbound marketing, which is like cold sales, cold calls, right? Cold
mhm,
emails. You're just kind of reaching out to people and hoping someone
mhm,
bites. Inbound marketing is a different type of marketing, which is really much predicated on this belief that people are their own empowered agents of
mhm,
buyers. And so you, as the seller, need to attract your buyer. So think of
mhm.
yourself almost as a magnet, bringing forward those correct, quote unquote, qualified leads. And
Okay.
so inbound marketing is trying to flip the script, which is that you're creating content that's very specific for the pain points of your key
Mhm,
market, and you
mhm,
develop buyer personas based upon that. And my buyer personas change every few years. You kind of update them, and you're trying to create a fictional character that is based on reality, so that when you're creating, let's say, a content piece, like my first content piece I created for my brand was co-founder disputes kill startups, try
uh,
mediation before it does.
mm,
And that piece gets over 1,000 hits a month, that
wow.
to this day. And it's not even that long. It's kind of very short, but it was talking about like co-founder disputes kill startups. So like when people are looking up co-founder disputes, like that one ranks up there.
Wow.
And so a lot of my clients, I've developed marketing channels based upon specific keywords and SEO that will target my target market based upon like how they're searching for specific queries. My
Okay.
late my latest content piece is what you should include, excuse me, in a founder's agreement, but you're probably not.
Ah,
And so a lot of clients, when they'll come to me, they'll be like, hey, we're having this disagreement. We didn't have a founders agreement, like, but we need
mm,
to figure out how to divide our equity. Like, we weren't really serious in the beginning. This is finally becoming serious. We might get like some seed money. Like, can you help us figure that out? And a lot of times, like, I'll point them to that. They'll point to some of the content pieces I created around co-founder
mhm,
agreements, what you should include, co-founder equity restructuring. So that's one way clients find me. And
mhm.
then another way is that I've developed relationships with people in the VC world that now they'll send me potential clients. So
Yeah.
so usually they might take a fee, right? Like there's a referral fee involved with that. And they'll say, look, this person or this team could really use your help. Do you just want to talk with them?
Mhm.
So that has been very advantageous. And then in the new year, I'm looking to scale. And I hired a marketing agency to help me start doing that. But that's the first time in 7 years that I've ever done that.
Yeah.
So it's just because I don't have the time, nor do
Yeah.
I want to do it anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we evolve, you become an expert in your area, and
Mhm.
and so you could do it at a certain level, but now you need an expert in that area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, take my money, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is an investment, and but that's part of growing your business and
Yep.
getting the right kind of help. It's like, you know, I oftentimes will use the medical field as an analogy for things,
Mm,
and that's why I do the conflict analysis. You don't just go in and do surgery. You have to
yeah.
do, you have to do some diagnostic work first, and prepping the patient for what's going to happen. And so that's what I feel my pre-mediation work is all about, is figuring out what's really going on here, and then deciding the best solution for treatment, and then also preparing people for what to expect, and then also what they want on the other side of it. So
Hmm.
yeah. Um, uh, I was going to say something about that, but just really stepping in to take a look at what's going on here and planning a strategy. And so it's like that in other aspects of business too.
Yeah, and I think so I'm not a lawyer, and I know a lot of people who enter mediation have that lawyer background. And
Hmm.
I know that there's talk around like non-lawyers as mediators, right? Like
Hmm.
how does it work? And I think the avenue for lawyer mediators is really set. Like there's a very specific kind of path you take.
Hmm.
You work with jams, ADR services, right? You're doing that kind of more evaluative work. And
Hmm.
then the non-lawyer route, which is me and I believe you as well, that's a different type of work. And you really
Hmm.
got to think of your brand, yourself as a business. And that's a
Hmm.
specific mindset shift too. And
Hmm.
taking courses like on inbound marketing or sales or even operations
Hmm.
in the beginning helped me start thinking like a
Yeah.
business,
Hmm.
so that I could chart my own path and become more of like an entrepreneur, because
Hmm.
conflict is inevitable. And if
Yeah.
you can niche and you can find the businesses that you want to work with and target them, it's
Hmm.
inevitable that you will get clients.
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, as a former career counselor, part of
Mm,
my work was always, what are you passionate about? And
mm,
then let's go find the jobs or the businesses that offer that and
mhm,
getting paid while doing what you love. And so
mhm,
that's really what we're talking about too, is, again, there's certain kinds of conflicts that you like to deal with more than others. Um, and, uh, and so if that's the case, then go for it. I remember
mm.
early in my career, I met somebody who was an antiquities
Oh,
mediator. I was like,
oh,
I never would have thought of that.
yeah. Neither would I. But I guess that could be a problem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so, that happened to be their specialty, and they love the field of mediation, and that's what they made as their practice. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
And I know one thing I emphasize, well, I've studied law a lot, and I've been a law professor. I'm not licensed as a lawyer, and so I oftentimes, say I deal with more of the relational aspects of
Mm,
people's conflicts,
mm,
and not that I don't have specialty areas that I focus on, but it's really usually the 55% of all conflicts are people based anyway. And
mhm,
so, if we look at that, uh, well, as another colleague of mine, Harold Coleman, says, is that, you know, for every dispute, there's the law, the
mm,
facts, and the people. And
mhm,
too many times, unfortunately, the lawyer-oriented mediator, focus on the facts and the law, but
mm.
they don't really deal with the people, and that's really getting at the
Yeah.
emotional content. Okay,
Mhm,
so yeah, yeah. So I'm curious then, with this intergenerational collaboration, that's one of your focal points. Um, what are some final words that you want to share with our viewers and listeners about,
mm,
again, where you see it going, what opportunities you see happening?
mm. Yeah, I think in the workplace, I'm seeing that there's a greater need for speed. And especially with a possible recession coming, there's a lot of worries, right, with runway capital or available capital. And so I think there's a caution there too. Like, don't sacrifice what could otherwise be something that is innovative
Mhm.
for speed. And so there's always that tension point. And when it
Mhm.
comes to intergenerational collaborations, I think that tension point is even more pronounced,
Mhm.
because you're seeing that, like, well, do we really want to put a group of people that may not communicate very well together, right? But because we need to go really fast, maybe we should just like cherry pick these people that we know
Yeah.
will work. And I think there's like some credence to that.
Mhm.
And you want to make sure that the team being assembled has not only the technical skills, but
Mhm.
also kind of the wherewithal, the outside perspective, like something like if you really want to innovate, if you really want to create a high performance culture, it's inevitable that you will need to bring people together who may not be, in the same generation,
Yeah.
especially if you're working at a bigger organization, and to see like what can we learn here, right? I think we've harped on that so much. And I think if there's one takeaway to listeners, it's like this is about learning. You will not grow if you're not willing to learn. And sometimes that requires you to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. So very true. Yeah.
Hmm.
It really, so I heard somebody say recently, it, it really takes being vulnerable,
Mm.
to open up, to be curious enough,
Hmm.
to have that conversation.
Yep,
Yeah.
I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. So, again, your book, The New Middle, I know that was love of labor for you,
Mm,
I really appreciate how well written and laid out it is. It
mm.
gives me ideas for my book. And so where can people really find it?
Amazon, right? Like where everyone goes nowadays for their
Yeah,
books. You
yeah,
can go
yeah.
to Barnes and Nobles too, but I just checked and it's actually more expensive on Barnes and Noble. So definitely go to Amazon.
Yeah, yeah. There we go.
Mhm,
Very good. Very good. Yeah, and I would like to just share with readers and listeners. It's a readable book. Brian's got
mm,
some great stories to illustrate his points and some practical
mm,
tips for how to move along. If I may, I'm not sure if you know
mm,
this person in this book, but he was a podcast guest of mine a few episodes ago, and so it might be a nice parallel to what you're
mhm,
talking about intergenerationally. George Chanos,
mm.
who is a former lawyer and one-time Nevada State Attorney General,
Oh wow.
but like you had a near-life experience or a near-death experience, I should say,
Hmm.
that opened up his life
Mm,
in ways that he never would have expected. And what started as a letter to his then 15-year-old daughter, who he thought he might be, leaving
mm.
behind without a father. Uh, the letter turned into several chapters, and then it became a book.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and so the book that he wrote that I'm really excited about is called Millennial Samurai,
Oh,
and
okay.
he
Mm,
takes a lot. He takes a very interesting look again, particularly with the what we can learn from millennials
mm,
and where
mm,
some of the vision is going in terms of new industries, new explorations that
mhm,
we boomers haven't even thought about,
mm.
and so I haven't read the entire thing, but I certainly have started. And but I would encourage you to, touch base since you're talking about cross generations as well as he is, but
Yeah,
from a different perspective. Yeah, yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just so enjoyed seeing you again, Bryant, and having you on my
Mm,
show, and excited to see what you're bringing to our startup groups to help make them more successful and sustainable. And
mm.
as you said, conflict is inevitable.
Yeah.
Um, so the more we learn on how to deal with it, manage it, face it, and live with it, then
Mm,
the more successful we'll be in all walks of life.
mhm. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
Yep, yep. Well, thank you again, Brian, for being here. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners for joining us for this episode on, the finding the value in intergenerational collaboration with Bryant Galindo.
Mm,
And do check out his book, The New Metal. And, I encourage you, if you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to others who you think might enjoy it. Subscribe, and that way you'll be notified of every episode coming up. And
mm,
we have a great lineup for season 3. And so do come back, do join us. And again, this is Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc.
mm. Thank you.
Thank you. I was so excited to have Bryant Galindo back on my show again. He just brings such a spirit and a different perspective, being from a different generation. And I'm so happy to see his book has been such a successful launch. And what was interesting is we talked about getting back together again. Bryant, does a lot of work with startups and entrepreneurs, as we talked about. And we realized we had a connection around working with intergenerational conflicts. And so I was so delighted to have him bring to us perspective and how we can learn from one another, up or down and all around. And so that leads me to our next guest speaker, because Gary Miles has been a longtime litigator with many years of experience doing some very high-profile cases. But like many, is it time to move on? He's been a trial lawyer, a managing partner, leader, and entrepreneur, and he has a passion, as do I, about helping people solve their problems, and particularly how to get out of their own way so that they can truly be successful, healthy, and satisfied with what they're doing. He'll share with us how his own journey, even though being very successful, wasn't quite fulfilling in other kinds of ways. And he shares his journey openly as far as the substance abuse that got in his way. And now he's been able to celebrate many years of success and a whole new turn in life. And so his program, The Pre-Lawyer, it's particularly targeted towards those in the legal field. You know, when you go through law school, you're trained to think in a certain way. And while that's really great when practicing law, unfortunately, it can carry over into how we deal with our other relationships. That's where we seem to find the conflict or the challenges. And so Gary comes with wonderful insight, wonderful tidbits, and certainly an extensive background on what makes him the kind of person that he is today. So mark your calendar, come on back and join me in just a couple of weeks. Gary Miles, the free lawyer. Pass it on, share it with your attorney friends, share it with your non-attorney friends, maybe share it with the spouses of your attorney friends. In any case, it's a way to open up our insight and gain new perspectives. Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. Subscribe below and come back and join us twice per month, decoding the conflict mindset.